Hello, this is Airplane Oxygen Not Included. Last episode, this rocket landed here, and I was unable to get back home from exploration down here. But I thankfully set up this recharging post right here, so we're going to give it a try. So we've got some water going in the research reactor now. The idea is this research reactor is just designed to be on for enough time to recharge this guy, so we get red bolt generators. I don't know if I can get one or two operating. I'm going to try. Let's start with just one. We'll try to push out two later on. Power is cut because this guy's not detecting any radiation because I haven't actually turned this on. Speaking of which, here we go. So this gives the signals to one of the dupes to load this guy up with some enriched uranium. I'm going to put in about 100 kilograms, not the full amount, and we'll see if that's enough to charge this. Here is the enriched uranium on the way, being put into the research reactor. And we're starting. Immediately gets an immense amount of radiation. But, I've got all these solar panels. I got some over here, some here. That's powering this guy here. I was hoping to run two. I may not be able to run the second one until these guys operate. But it's going to take a little bit of steam. I'll try. Let's see what happens. These things don't function well when there's power out. So far, just realizing too, we're relying on solar panels. And, it's not going to be bright all day long. So, that may be an issue. Well, actually, no. Hold on. It doesn't matter. These charge so... I'm used to rebel generators that charge much slower than this. Yeah, that's fine. We're getting a couple shots. It'll probably go down overnight, but pick up the next cycle. We'll see how long it takes. Just noticed my liquid airlock of petroleum made its way down here. Ah, fuck. Not the best. Oh, not the best at all. Not at all. How does one fix this? I do not want to send a dupe to mop that up. This is... Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now, this is all because nuclear waste got here, and what I did... I built this rocket platform far too close. I knew better than that. I should have had extra clearance. But we're just experimenting kind of at this point. I've never done one of these guys. I do have one over on this asteroid. I'm used to building larger scale ones. And these seem to function, but miniaturizing them is something I haven't yet mastered. Let's go back over to this asteroid. We've got water there. That's not going to stay as water. Where's my petroleum? This is probably hard on the dupes, but let's get them to try to recreate this liquid airlock. We are approaching nighttime, and as expected, these guys are starting to fail. But we do have steam all around. I didn't get my liquid airlock petroleum, but nuclear waste is back. I had them open up the petroleum right here, and it just disappeared. I think... It just kind of went up above this and went out into space. But we are starting to get some power from the steam turbines. I wonder how long it's going to be before that's going to generate enough power to let these guys run. It only just occurred to me, if I had to build a battery and connect it to this heavy watt wire to it, inside my rockets... I've got lots of hydrogen. I could have easily engaged my hydrogen generator, plus additional solar panels. They're fully functional, at least during the day. And there's a manual generator. So that was an option. Even with without that, though, this really isn't that difficult. Two steam turbines are running. Pretty sure we're going to be able to operate all cycle long. Well, I am quite pleased. This system is working quite well. This is extending my range significantly of the Rad engine. So I was able to fly here but not get back home, so I can go back here. Or I could go see what this is. The other nice thing is I could, especially with a rocket that has got so much storage capacity, and that I could even potentially build this on a rocket where we don't have a base, which is really neat. I think there was just one thing I did screw up. That rocket platform shouldn't have been so close, but note to self, bring that a little bit further over. So back on the base, while that rocket has been traveling, I've been experimenting with a few things. I've got the plant pulverizer running. I've got Brax wax cleaner and the companion critter fountain that goes from this guy here. I also, so far, haven't filmed this bit. I think I'm going to start a new series incorporating some of the new elements of this, which I've been neglecting. And it's actually quite interesting how some of this stuff works and what it gives you. I think I've been too early to dismiss stuff. I also built a dehydrator and rehydrator with the fact that I've got a deep freezer, probably not the most useful thing. There is the upgrade a while back on kitchens, and I neglected the spice grinder. Well, I experimented with it before, and my feeling back then was that there wasn't much point. I feel differently now. I've got all my pepper bread with season status of Ronnie, so the dupes get a +3. That is something I should have tried to get earlier. I'm going to try to get earlier in another playthrough. And there's lots of other little things I'm realizing I want to experiment with, just so that I know what the value is, or just basically how it runs, because they're always adding little bits of things in this game, which is really nice. Oh yeah, this is a random thing that just, I don't know when this was added, but there's a tile. You can store 100,000 kilograms of stuff. I guess it's meant for rockets, I'm assuming, because, well, you don't really need this in a big base, but of course you also don't need it when your rocket's this size either, but that's another thing. I think that's the end of the playthrough of this particular base. Learned quite a bit during this playthrough. Tried out all kinds of new stuff. Go over that in a minute. But I've got a plan for my next playthrough, which is going to be very different. My plan there is, what would I do if I were one of these dupes in this playthrough? And I bet my priorities would be extremely different. Probably going to focus on higher quality food above some other stuff earlier on, as soon as possible. I'm having the thought, if I was stuck on this rock, I don't want to have to go days and weeks without having to get better food. I want that as soon as possible. It would probably also lead towards a much more organized base. My base is functional, but it lacks something. And I think the next playthrough, I'm going to have a different perspective. So there's that. Before I go off and do that, though, let me leave you with a few thoughts of what I've learned and thought of this playthrough. I think one of the top things I've learned during this playthrough is the star map location sensor. It's just a subtle thing, but it's so nice, especially when you have a rocket and you don't want stuff to leak out in space as you're traveling. So that's always going to be a piece of my development work going forward if I'm into the rocketry space in this game. I've always wondered, if you're stranded somewheres, how do you recharge a Red Bolt engine? And I finally mastered how to do this. There's some tweaks that need to be done, but I now feel I'm no longer constrained to just taking off and recharging on my home world. The spice grinder is something I've tried before and neglected. I think for the reason that I was scared of using up iron. But it's +3 to carrying stuff. It's pretty decent and something I think I'm going to focus on getting a little bit earlier than this point in the game. This heat exchange or cooling exchange has been doing really good. It's been reducing the amount of effort I needed to spend on running a thermo aqua tuner. Natural means for cooling. There's a couple changes I want to make on my next build, on my next base. I think I mentioned them in playthrough earlier. But I very much like to have this, and my next version should be even better. My Dreco setup, I have got an insane amount of reed fiber and plastic. So these guys seem to be quite happy with this. I've got wild pinch of pepper plants. I'm growing my own bristle blossom. Probably not enough, but I've got more than enough plastic. So actually, it is enough in a way. The critter condo, the only thing I seem to find use for is you can cram, I think it's 1 extra critter per stable. Not that super useful in my mind, but it kind of, the animation's kind of cool, so there's that. My research reactor, this is decent, but I wanted to experiment, well there's 2 things. I want to experiment with being able to get even more power from this. And I didn't really do this in this version because on the Moonlit cluster, you're kind of like compressed for space. So there still is more experimentation I want to do. Especially in a base that might consume more power than I currently am consuming over here. I never did an experiment with nuclear. Well, I tried a few things with it and never really mounted to anything. So basically, nuclear waste in the future, you're just being leaked out into space. I've been quite scared of building solar panels, and that's because the damage that can come from meteorites. This is the first time in a while I built a space scanner. Actually quite happy with the results so far, so this is something I think I'm definitely going to carry through into future playthroughs, and even try to do this earlier on than I have in the past. As for the recreation room, I think there was only one boo-boo I made, which is not having your steam cycle through. I was having it pause here. Even with a ceramic pipe, that wasn't good enough. It was bursting. But other than that, these are running fine, so definitely going to make sure I remember that little change in my future playthrough. So I built a stable for these slickers. In the past, I always thought it was pointless building a stable for these guys and tending to them. Pretty much feel the same way. This is the most amount of crude oil I've got in hundreds of cycles. Maybe I get a little bit of meat, but by the point of getting this meat, I've got meat from enough sources anyways, and this just produces a little bit of heat and extra work that the dupes just don't have to do. I've been trying to experiment with getting wild critters to duplicate themselves. So this is a wild critter that's happy, but it doesn't seem to be laying eggs. I think only tame dupes have the ability to produce more eggs. Anyway, with this experiment, I thought it would be worth it, because if I could, I would have all kinds of wild critters that don't need to be fed. But there's also this critter fountain, so in a separate experiment, this one, I've disabled this guy here, the grooming station. These are tame pips. On the other hand, this actually seems to work really well. And the cool thing about it is I don't have to have dupes use the grooming station. On the downside, they do have to use the plant pulverizer, but there is one other technology I haven't got into creating that material or milk that goes in here. I'll be experimenting with that at some point. Over on this asteroid, I relied heavily on wild sleet wheat thanks to pips. May not have been able to multiply wild critters, but I certainly know how to multiply wild plants. But in my next playthrough, I'm thinking of avoiding doing this, just more for the experiment of seeing what's going to happen if I rely more on farming than wild plants. The other thing is, this is just a general comment of the Moonlit playthrough, but there's a lot of multitasking. It's fun relying on the fact that I've got to go back from asteroid to asteroid. But I gotta be honest, I completely neglected these dupes for like hundreds of cycles too. They've been able to feed themselves. There's oxygen. It's really cool that everything's sort of in this balanced environment where I don't have to be here to do anything. But other than maybe a little bit polluted water spill of dirty air. But yeah, that's why I want to change up my gameplay a little bit to avoid the situation where I just kind of throw dupes as machines. And as I mentioned, next time the playthrough objective is to see what I would do if I was one of these guys. I probably won't be as hard and give them as a difficult life. My goal this time is just kind of use them as machinery, so that's going to change. All right, this Biobot builder, my thoughts on this one are mixed. If this had been in my main base, I think I would be pushing it. I've disconnected power of the pumps. I think the next playthrough, I'm just going to make sure that this is generated in my main asteroid. And I'm going to see how well that goes. As for melting 2 tiles of the rocket, I mean, this is a game changer if you're able to do this and build a mega rocket. What would I do different with the design? It'd be largely the same, but there's a couple things that I would focus on. One, do not forget, if you're on a space mission, your exosuit forge, as well as reed fiber, because you need to repair the Atmos suits while you're out and about. Telescope I probably would have brought into an actual science building. That's actually, I didn't realize, I just kind of threw it there because I thought why not look out in space, but actually this has been a very effective thing because I could go to the corner of space, for instance, not have enough energy or fuel to get back, but I could just park myself there. I've got enough calories and oxygen for the dupes, and the telescope will do the rest of the business. One thing I learned is a Saturn critter trap. I've always just dug these up and thrown them in a room where I know pips can't get access to. That's never happening again. These guys produce way more hydrogen than I realized they did. I've got 9 of them. And I don't rely, maybe I do now at this point on the game, but earlier on, I didn't need steam turbines. I could rely on hydrogen generators with just the amount of hydrogen I'm getting from that. Now, you do that coupled with building them next to beta hives, they self-populate themselves. That's incredible. I don't know if my next playthrough is going to be on an asteroid that has beta hives, but if I do, I'm definitely taking advantage of this. One thing I told myself I was going to do in this playthrough, and I didn't, just realizing that I never built these battery modules within the base. Something you can actually do, make some platforms in some of those batteries, and you get larger batteries that don't produce heat in your circuitry. My playthroughs always typically have this setup here. It's a system to remove food poisoning. Probably not going to have one next time because if I'm relying heavily on farming instead of pips, then I might just send polluted water elsewhere. We'll see what happens in that playthrough. I don't often get out to the distant asteroids. This is the first time I've kind of did a little construction. I'll be with a rover. Just note to self, don't give yourself just enough metal to build your platform. That didn't go so well in this particular asteroid. I've got a lot of idle dupes throughout this playthrough. And then the longer I've kind of gone, the more often that seems to be the case. Not necessarily a bad thing, but that's something I'd like to challenge myself next playthrough. And I've got a curveball. In addition to envisioning myself as one of these dupes and how I would completely change things. And I think the next playthrough will be significantly different because of that fact. But I've got another curveball coming that may challenge the whole idleness thing. I'm not going to explain that now. You have to wait for the next episode. But yeah, stay tuned for that. Well, that's just a number of my thoughts on the game so far and the different elements that I've done. My overall thought of the Moonlit Cluster, and it still is one of my favorite asteroids. One of the things I don't like about it the most, I mentioned before, the multitasking, going back and forth. But what I do love about it is the fact that you don't have all your resources and you have to build rocketry and depend on that in order to actually bring all the stuff together. Well, that's going to be it for the Rad Moon. We got to try out some of the new features of the game, such as the Biobot Builder. I don't think I used it that terribly much, but I think the next playthrough, if this is on my main base, I'm really curious what that's going to do. And I've got a bunch of changes for the next playthrough. It's going to be different asteroid. As I mentioned, it's going to be, from my perspective, of what my priorities would be as an actual dupe instead of a player. And I think that's going to really change. I tend to do a lot of the same things. This is going to kind of challenge me to play this in a very different way. Anyway, very excited about starting that. Also going to use that in the playthrough to experiment with some of the little stuff that I've been neglecting, such as the spice grinder and various things, and integrate that earlier on in my game. Thank you so much for anyone that has watched this series, liked anything, subscribed along the way, and hopefully I will see you next time. We're going to try a really different thing. I will see you then.